Grover Norquist, founder and president of Americans for Tax Reform. Grover, it's good to have you on America's Forum.
Good to be with you.
Grover, conservatives are pushing Republican candidates to sign a pledge to oppose Obama's immigration reform agenda. Can you tell us what the pledge looks like? As I understand it, F.A.I.R is sponsoring the pledge, and it's along the lines of a similar pledge you put out years ago that I signed as a candidate.
Sure. Well, Americans for Tax Reform, starting back in 1986, so 25 years ago, we put together a pledge, which is a single sentence. It says, I will vote. It's a pledge to the voters of the state, not to me or Americans for Tax Reform, to the voters of the state. It says, I pledge that I will vote against and oppose all efforts to raise taxes. Tax reform is fine. Tax increases are not fine. And the first year we got 100 congressmen and 20 senators to take the pledge. With the class of 94 coming in, we started to get more like 95% of all the Republicans in the House and Senate. Today, there are at least 219 members of the U.S. House who've taken and kept that pledge, and I think 41 senators. Most of the House and Senate Republicans running in competitive seats this year have made this commitment. So it's not 100%, but it's over 90 to 95% of Republican incumbent and challengers are making the commitment not to raise taxes. A lot of groups have tried to say, well, we're going to do something like what ATR did, but then they put so many different issues down. It's not a single pledge; it becomes a multi-part one. And as a result, they tend not to have the oomph. I would recommend to people who are trying to do something like a pledge, one, pick an issue that all Republicans agree on, like not raising taxes, but also when you try and micromanage members by giving them a list of a number of different positions, using words that don't have the same meaning. The F.A.I.R one says you're against amnesty. Well, every effort to reform immigration that's been put forward has been denounced by F.A.I.R as amnesty. So you're sort of handing over to another organization the ability to define your vote on something.
Now, Grover, hang on just a second here. And we both prefaced 1994. I was pleased to sign your pledge. Forgive me, but this is a little bit of pot calling the kettle. You set up the dynamic, either you're for tax increases or you're against them. F.A.I.R says either you're for amnesty or you're against it. To suggest that somehow this is an iteration that is a bridge too far, isn't that a case of the pot calling the kettle?
Oh, no. My objection is, I'm not arguing. I was saying if you wanted a successful pledge or questionnaire, you have to work with definitions that are independent of anybody else adjudicating them. And one of the challenges we have on the discussion of immigration reform, I mean, it's a different commitment. Not all Republicans support Ronald Reagan's version of pro-immigration policies. Not everybody supports Steve King's more restrictionist view. So there's a big division within Republicans. So as an issue, it's an interesting one. It's not the unifier for Republicans that the tax pledge is. It'll divide people.
Would it not help in this discussion, Grover, would it not help if we said illegal immigration for those who come to the country illegally rather than trying to morph this into, quote, immigration? Wouldn't that be a start toward truth in labeling?
Well, it would. Here's the challenge, major parts. One opposes changes to allow more legal immigration. So it's not just saying they're against illegal immigration. They're against anything that would increase immigration in the United States, like deciding that we wanted to have more immigrants legally. It's also, you have to oppose what's important to the farming community, the ranching community, and the high-tech community, which is guest worker programs and H-1Bs. So, and then there's a third part that says we're against amnesty. And then the challenge is, that, as you know from talk radio hosts and others, people throw that term around rather loosely, and it doesn't quite necessarily always mean the same thing.
Grover, your concerns politically, a lot of folks are saying, and I haven't seen the polling to back this up, but there are a lot of people saying that, gee, if the Republicans don't engage in some sort of immigration reform, this will solidify Hispanic anger against Republicans and hurt the GOP in the next presidential election in 2016. Do you buy into that theory?
I don't know. Well, not as stated. We have a challenge, and that is that some people who call themselves Republicans or conservatives have engaged in some rather harsh rhetoric, which then gets attached to all Republicans. There's a Republican state legislator in Kansas who suggested that we should shoot people from helicopters the way they do hogs, and then refused to apologize for it. That ends up all over Hispanic radio and TV. He's an elected Republican official. Very few Republicans would associate themselves with that, but very few have denounced it too. So I think that the biggest problem is a handful of people who go out and say some very vicious things and don't get slapped down by other Republicans and conservatives saying, hey, that is not our position.
Grover, so that lament could be offered on just about any position, such as Obamacare, where you have the left saying that it's the intent of conservatives to basically deny people health care. Rhetorical extremism, unfortunately, or exaggeration, is part and parcel of politics. But let me turn to another notion here.
Encouraging murdering people is not.
Well, just for the record, I disassociate myself from anything like that, even though I'm a strong border hawk. Now, let me ask you about one of the possible solutions out there. A lot of talk again about Republicans and what they should do. Should they be pushing for a status card for illegals that would allow those illegals to be taxed and identified for law enforcement purposes? And what's the difference between that and amnesty?
Well, there are several parts to immigration reform as being discussed in Washington. The easiest parts for free market Reagan Republicans is to say we ought to have a guest worker program, particularly in the farm industry. There are a lot of jobs that are seasonal. It's hard to make a living if jobs show up for 3 months and then disappear. But people can come in as guest workers, and that worked very well during the Eisenhower years with the Bracero program. We had very little illegal immigration during that period because people could come over and work and then head back home again and come back each year with a permit, with a card, which made it okay. So I think that's an important part of any looking at how to deal with illegal immigration. If you don't have a way for people to legally come and take available jobs in ag, they'll come over illegally, and that's what's happened over the years. The other piece is the high-tech one. We have in Canada, Microsoft has a campus where they hire people who come from around the world and have to work across the border, not being well-paid, productive Americans working in Washington State, but as Canadians, because our immigration policy doesn't let us bringing in high-tech and high-skilled people and puts severe limits on that, which handicaps American companies internationally. Those are two easy pieces of tax reform that Republicans and free market guys, now the unions hate them, I understand that, the unions fight that, and that's why the Democrats and the unions killed the guest worker program in the 60s. The challenge with the F.A.I.R. Commitment that they want people to commit to is it includes attacking those things.
Well, so but here's the problem economically, and I want to get to one last point before we go just to offer it. When you have record unemployment, when you have many in the high-tech profession out of work, to bring an influx of workers in right now seems to work at cross purposes. That would be the F.A.I.R. argument, but I respect the point you're putting forward about the H-1B visas. Now, before we go, and only about 30 seconds, is there a possibility after this congressional election, Obama may try to do a mass pardon of illegal immigrants like Jimmy Carter did with draft dodgers during the Vietnam era back in '77? Do you think that could happen?
It could, and it's one of the arguments that some Republicans make for passing a law and not letting the president have complete discretion.
Well, Grover Norquist, we know that you have your pledge out there, and as I've said before, imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. We appreciate your time and look forward to having you back real soon again here on America's Forum.
knock them dead.
And this issue on illegal immigration is going to continue to live on and on until there's some resolution on this.
Well, and you've brought it up before, but I'm curious, because a lot of people will say that immigration is going to be the issue, that hot button issue that's going to pull more people away from the GOP and towards the Democratic vote. Do you think that's going to be the case?
I would just advise my friends who embrace this monolithic notion that Hispanics are going to vote in a block, understand there are a whole lot of Hispanics who immigrated here legally who don't look favorably upon people cutting in line. So I just say beware the myth of the monolith. What do you say? Tweet us your comments at Newsmax TV, #America's Forum.